It is 10 years since the former Prime Minister Julia Gillard's now famous misogyny speech in federal parliament.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not. And the government will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man.
Well, has anything changed in the time since that speech when it comes to gender equality in politics, the media and Australian society? The book Not Now, Not Ever explores that with contributions from leading writers and commentators. It's been edited by Julia Gillard, who joins us now from Brisbane. Good morning to you. Welcome to News Breakfast.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
I think one of the most surprising things I learned was that you have not actually re-watched a full copy of that speech since the day you delivered it. Why is that?
No, I haven't. I mean, obviously, I've seen extracts because they get shown in the course of media interviews like this one. And when I speak about the speech on stage at conferences and events, but I've never sat down and watched it from woe to go. And that's because I want my memories of that day to be my memories rather than become overlaid with what the footage looks like.
Well, I can tell you the memories for some people, they hang on earrings. Friends gave me your words on earrings. At 10 years on, are you surprised that besides the fact that it's created a lot of merchandise, clearly, that it has almost grown from that first day?
Oh, look, it's extraordinary and I am completely amazed at where it's got to. If you'd said to me after I gave it, or even within, a few months after I gave it, look, we'll be talking about this in 10 years' time, I would have looked at you like you'd taken leave of your senses. It's just extraordinary. And it really has become, I think, divorced from that parliamentary context, and indeed I think it's in some ways become divorced from me. It's now a companion for women out there who are frustrated that their lives still have sexist hurdles in them, and when they hit one of those sexist hurdles, then the speech is there and they rewatch it for a bit of energy. And so I knew, given how it has grown, that the 10-year anniversary was always going to be noted as an event. So I thought, let's use it to do more than look back. Let's try and look at misogyny today and look forward. And that's what the Not Now, Not Ever book is about, with all of the proceeds going to the Global Institute for Women's Leadership to support the research there.
And I'll talk about the future and what it's looking like in a moment, but I still just want to drill down on this speech. I was in America at the time in the Washington Bureau for the ABC, and I had American friends talking to me about it almost before Australian friends were. And Catherine Murphy, the Guardian's Catherine Murphy, does sort of confess in the book, in her chapter, that it was missed to a certain degree because of the politics, because of what was going on. And some of your critics have said, well, hang on, it was a very politically astute speech that was given at the time.
Catherine Murphy's essay is a very powerful one, and the Canberra Press Gallery did miss it. And I think that's because their conception of their role is that they look down at that parliamentary chamber, particularly during question time, and all of these events sort of substituted for question time. They look down at that chamber and they think their role is to call the day's play, who's up, who's down, who's made a good contribution, who hasn't. And so they were bringing that lens to it, where around the world, and I think women around Australia, were less interested in the mechanics and the temper of that parliamentary day. They saw it as a sort of cry of outrage about misogyny and sexism, which they still felt in their everyday lives. So yes, the speech has different dimensions depending on who you were, where you were, and what you thought your role was at that moment. But 10 years on, I'm not sure anybody is particularly interested now in everything to do with that parliamentary day, but I think people do want to see a changed world, a more gender equal world, and they look at the speech in that context.
You have suggested that you think it'll be inevitable there'll be major procedural reform within the parliament, within question time, because despite all the promises of it being a less angry place that puts a lot of women, a lot of girls off, you've got to admit. You think that we will see change there?
I don't think it's inevitable, but I think it's probable over time. I think community expectations have changed, and I think how we treat each other at work, how we want people to treat each other at community events when crowds gather, expectations have changed. And then people look at the parliament and go, wow, that's kind of still dinosaur land in terms of how people are allowed to treat each other and get away with it. So I think over time the parliament will respond to that, or is more likely than not to respond to that. Now, I'm not someone who was ever alienated by the fact that Question Time in particular was a very robust place. If anything, I went into the parliament wanting to show that a woman could survive and thrive in that environment. But I do recognise now that people have different expectations, and it would be good if the parliament reflected that.
International Day of the Girl, and we've had some grim takeouts, really. I do feel like one step forward, two steps back, not just here in Australia, but around the world, what we're seeing in Iran, what we're seeing in Afghanistan.
Yes. I mean, when we look right around the world today and we look at statistics from bodies like the World Economic Forum that tell us that it's going to be well over 100 years before we reach gender equality globally, when we know that hundreds of millions of girls are out of school, that they're very likely to end up in lives of poverty, potentially forced marriage as a result of never getting an education and never getting an opportunity, and that is going backwards, including in Afghanistan, that is very depressing. So this lens of gender equality is not just about us in Australia and the remaining barriers here, but what we can do to lean in and help others around the world who are facing even more formidable barriers.
And back here in Australia, when do you reckon we'll see another female Prime Minister?
Well, I think it'll be a while, and in part I think that because I'm obviously hoping that the Albanese Labor government lasts for a very long time. That would gladden my heart as a Labor supporter. But I think the starting base for having many more women prime ministers is to make sure that our parliaments are about half men, half women. Labor has achieved that nationally and in state parliaments, and the Conservative side of politics, I think, needs to reflect on how effective quotas were on the Labor side of politics to change who represented the political party in Parliament, and to look at those mechanisms on their own side. They've always rejected those mechanisms over time, but clearly the last election showed that women and men do want to see a different face to the Conservative side of politics. And so I think as part of their looking at themselves post their election defeat, that should be on the table.
Well, Not Now, Not Ever is a thought-provoking book. Thanks for pulling it together and for being on the program this morning.
Thank you very much.